A limousine pulls up to a Beverly Hills hotel. Okay. A man in a sharp gray suit steps out, looking lost in a world of wealth, but also in search of something more. Then there she is. A woman with a radiant smile, fiery hair, and eyes that carry both innocence and strength. In that moment, movie history changed forever. Pretty Woman wasn't just another romantic comedy, it became a fairy tale for the modern world. And even today, more than 3 decades later, Julia Roberts and Richard Gere's love story in that film feels as alive as it did on opening night. Asterisk, back in March of 1990. Audiences filled theaters with little idea of what was about to happen. A small film, originally written as a dark story about class and survival, transformed into one of the most beloved romantic movies of all time. Pretty Woman introduced us to Edward Lewis, a wealthy businessman searching for direction, and Vivian Ward, a woman living day by day, chasing her own kind of freedom. What started as a business deal quickly turned into something no one expected, a story about love, transformation, and second chances. The film didn't just entertain people, it became a cultural touchstone. Everywhere you went, people were talking about Pretty Woman. It wasn't just Julia Roberts' radiant laugh or Richard Gere's cool, quiet charm. It was the chemistry between them, the way their characters lifted each other up, challenged each other, and created a love story that felt impossible, yet somehow real.
Ow.
Audiences saw themselves in it. They believed in the dream that someone could walk into your life and completely change it. Not with money or power, but with love. From its very first weekend, the movie was unstoppable. Critics expected it to be a simple romantic comedy, but instead, it became a box office giant, earning over $400 million worldwide. Julia Roberts, who had only been in a few films before, became a star overnight. Her performance lit up the screen, playful, vulnerable, and unforgettable. Richard Gere, already a respected actor, found himself celebrated as one of Hollywood's most charming leading men. They gave us something rare, a story that felt timeless. But what makes Pretty Woman endure isn't just the numbers or the awards. It's the moments. That unforgettable shopping scene, where Vivian is dismissed for not belonging in a luxury store only to return later, transformed and glowing with confidence. The laughter in the hotel room where Edward closes the piano lid on her fingers, in a moment of spontaneous humor. And, of course, the ending, Edward climbing the fire escape with flowers in his hand, proving that even a man who had everything could risk it all for love. These moments still live on in the hearts of millions, replayed in memory like favorite songs. And speaking of songs, who could forget the soundtrack? Roxette's It Must Have Been Love didn't just play in the background, it became the heartbeat of the film. The song carried all the emotions of Edward and Vivian's journey, the longing, the hope, the heartbreak, and finally the love that survives against the odds. For many, hearing that song even today instantly brings back the images of Julia's laughter, Richard's steady gaze, and the magic of a love story that seemed to belong in another world. What's remarkable is how Pretty Woman turned into more than just a movie. It became a symbol of hope, a reminder that love can show up in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the person you least expect might be the one who changes your life forever. Over 30 years later, new generations continue to discover the film. Parents who saw it on the big screen now share it with their children, passing down the magic like a storybook. It's proof that some films don't fade with time, they grow stronger, because they speak to something universal in all of us, the dream of being truly seen, truly loved, truly transformed by another person. Pretty Woman wasn't meant to be a fairy tale, but it became one. A story that keeps reminding us that love, in its truest form, doesn't care about money, background, or circumstance. Love just happens, and once it does, it can rewrite your whole life. That is why this movie still holds such a powerful place in our hearts, and why the love story of Julia Roberts and Richard Gere continues to live forever. Asterisk, sometimes a movie gives us great characters, but once in a while gives us something even rarer, an invisible spark between two actors that feels so real it's almost impossible to believe it was scripted. That's what happened when Julia Roberts and Richard Gere stood in front of the camera together. Their connection in Pretty Woman wasn't just acting, it was magic. The magic that could never be rehearsed, only felt. Julia was only 22 years old when the movie was filmed. She was young, relatively new to Hollywood, and still figuring out her place in an industry known for being tough. Richard, on the other hand, was already established, confident, and experienced. On paper, they came from completely different worlds, just like Vivian and Edward. And yet, when the cameras rolled, something clicked. Julia brought a freshness and light that made Richard's quiet presence shine even brighter. He grounded. Her energy, while she lifted his seriousness into warmth. Together, they didn't just play Vivian and Edward, they became them. Even behind the scenes, everyone could see it. Director Gary Marshall often told stories about how Julia and Richard made the film better than it was written. One of the most famous moments, the scene where Edward snaps the jewelry box shut as Vivian reaches for the necklace, wasn't scripted at all. Richard did it as a joke, trying to make Julia laugh. Her surprised, joyful reaction was so genuine that Marshall kept it in the final cut. It's that single moment, Julia's sparkling laughter, became one of the most iconic images in movie history. It wasn't written, it was real. Their off-screen bond grew in ways the audience never expected. Richard once admitted that Julia left him little notes during filming suite, funny reminders that made their days lighter. She called him my knight in shining armor, while he described her as the heartbeat of the film. Years later, when they reunited for interviews, that warmth hadn't disappeared. Sitting together on talk shows, their laughter and playful glances reminded fans of why their love story on screen felt so believable.
They didn't need to say much the way.
They looked at each other, told the story. What's unique about their chemistry is that it wasn't about physical attraction alone, it was about trust. Julia trusted Richard to support her in her breakout role. And Richard trusted Julia to bring authenticity to a character that could have easily been reduced to a cliché. Together, they gave the world something rare, an on-screen couple that felt human, flawed, yet completely right for each other. And while Hollywood is filled with love stories that fade once the cameras stop rolling, Julia and Richard's partnership has always remained special. They didn't fall into scandal or gossip. They didn't need to. What they had was respect, mutual admiration that carried through decades. Whenever they reunited, whether for the movie Runaway Bride or anniversary celebrations of Pretty Woman, the spark was still there. Fans could see it, and more importantly, could feel it. It's no wonder that many people secretly wish Pretty Woman 2 had been made not just for the story of Edward and Vivian, but because watching Julia and Richard together again feels like watching two souls who understand each other without words. That's the kind of chemistry you can't manufacture. And it's why this love story continues to live forever in the hearts of fans around the world. Asterisk, what if the story didn't end on that fire escape? What if, after the limo drove away, the city lights of Los Angeles held one more chapter of Edward and Vivian's love story? Fans have asked this question for decades. Pretty Woman may not have an official sequel, but in the hearts of millions, the story continues to live written every time the movie is played. Reimagined every time Julia Roberts and Richard Gere smile at each other in an interview. Picture this: Edward Lewis, older now, wiser, no longer chasing deals but chasing meaning, and Vivian Ward, no longer just the girl from Hollywood Boulevard, but a woman who built her own world, confident, independent, yet still carrying that unforgettable sparkle in her eyes. Together, they're not perfect. They argue, they stumble, they laugh, they forgive. But isn't that the beauty of love? That after all the grand gestures, it's the small, everyday moments that truly prove a love story can last forever. In this dream of Pretty Woman 2, Edward and Vivian's fairy tale doesn't fade, it evolves. Imagine them walking down Rodeo Drive again, not as a businessman and an outsider, but as equals. Vivian doesn't need anyone to save her anymore. She's her own hero. And Edward, the man who once thought money could fix everything, has finally learned that the only wealth that matters is the love he carries beside him. Fans have built this sequel in their imaginations, sometimes without even realizing it. Every Reunion photo of Julia and Richard sparks new ideas. Every interview where they laugh together feels like a secret message that the story isn't over. Social media buzzes with fan art, re-edited trailers, and posts that say, "What if?" Because the truth is, Pretty Woman left us with a promise that fairy tales can exist in the real world. And promises like that never truly end. The magic of this dream is that it doesn't need Hollywood to bring it to life. It already exists in the way audiences remember. In the way couples who once watched the movie on their first date now show it to their children. In the way the final scene, with Edward climbing the fire escape, has become a symbol of risking everything for love. Pretty Woman 2 lives inside the people who carry the story forward, each adding their own chapter in their minds, each holding on to the hope that love true. Fearless love can't outlast time itself, because maybe the real sequel isn't about Edward and Vivian at all. Maybe it's about us, the dreamers who believed in them. Every time we press play, every time we hum "It Must Have Been Love," we are writing the continuation. We are keeping their story alive. That in itself is proof. This love story never really ended. It simply lives forever. Asterisk, there are some songs that don't just play in the background of a movie. They become part of its soul. For Pretty Woman, that song was Roxette's "It Must Have Been Love." From the very first notes, soft and aching, it carried the weight of Edward and Vivian's story. The longing, heartbreak, the impossible dream turning into something real. It wasn't just a soundtrack. It was the voice of the love story itself. Every time that melody played, audiences felt something stir inside them. The lyrics spoke of love slipping away, but the movie showed us the opposite. Love finding a way to stay. That contrast made the song unforgettable. It wrapped around the film like a second heartbeat, reminding us that love is fragile. Love is powerful, and once it touches you, it changes you forever. Even today, decades later, when that song comes, on the radio, people are instantly transported back to the sight of Julia Roberts, smiling in the sunlight. Richard Gere, watching her with quiet devotion, and the promise that even the most unlikely love can last. But the legacy of Pretty Woman goes beyond a film and a soundtrack. It has lived on as a symbol of transformation, of how love can rewrite a person's story. Vivian was never saved by Edward. She discovered her worth. Edward wasn't rescued by Vivian. He discovered his heart. Together, they created a new kind of fairy tale, one that wasn't about castles or crowns, but about two people daring to believe in each other when no one else did. That is why the film feels eternal. It wasn't about money or glamour or fantasy. It was about the raw, undeniable truth that love can appear in the most unexpected places and turn ordinary. Lives into extraordinary stories, and maybe that's why fans have never stopped dreaming about them. Julia Roberts and Richard Gere didn't just play roles. They embodied a feeling. When they reunited years later for interviews, for celebrations, even just sitting side by side, the spark was still there. Not a scripted spark, but something real. Respect, admiration, a quiet kind of love that lives in the spaces between words. Watching them together reminds us that Pretty Woman wasn't a chapter that closed. It was a story that continues every time we remember it. In the end, Pretty Woman became more than a movie. It became a promise that love, when it's true, doesn't fade with time. It lingers. It grows. It finds its way back, again and again. Ain't just like the final chords of "It Must Have Been Love." It echoes in our hearts long after the credits roll. So, when we ask if there will ever be a Pretty Woman 2, maybe the answer is simple. It already exists. Not on the screen, but in us, in the memories we hold, in the dreams we imagine, in the way we still believe in love that conquers everything. Because Edward and Vivian's love story never really ended, it lives forever. And every time that song plays, we are reminded, some love stories are too powerful to ever fade away. Asterisk, there are stories that end when the screen fades to black. And then there are stories that escape the frame, stories that follow us home, whispering through the years, reminding us that love is the one thing that never grows old. Pretty Woman is one of those stories. Think about it. More than 3 decades have passed, yet Edward and Vivian still live in our memories as if they never left. They exist in the way we quote the lines, in the way we hum the song, in the way we smile whenever we see Julia Roberts' laughter or Richard Gere's steady gaze. Their story is stitched into the fabric of our own lives, replayed every time we fall in love, every time we take a chance, every time we believe in something bigger than ourselves. What makes this love story eternal is not just the movie, or even the actors, but the way it has become part of us. It's the couple who saw the film on their very first date and are now growing old together. It's the teenager discovering it for the first time on a streaming service, feeling the same butterflies audiences felt back in 1990. It's every dreamer who looks at Vivian and Edward and says, if they can find love against the odds, maybe so can I. And maybe that's the true magic. That Pretty Woman was never only about Vivian and Edward. It was about all of us. It's about believing that no matter where you start or how impossible it seems, love has the power to change everything. That belief doesn't fade. It lingers, like the final notes of It Must Have Been Love, haunting, tender, unforgettable. So when we say Julia Roberts and Richard Gere's love story lives forever, we don't mean in some unwritten sequel. We mean it in the way their chemistry carved a place in history, in the way their characters became symbols of hope, and in the way their story continues to glow every time we watch, every time we remember, every time we dare to love as fearlessly as they did. Some love stories end with goodbye, but the greatest ones, they live forever in this. This was one of the greatest